So our next speaker, I'm just so excited to have Theresa Wilbanks with us. Good morning.
Hi, Linda.
I'm
I'm
so
happy to
glad
be
to
here as
see you
well.
today. So glad. Um,
Yeah,
I'm going to let you tell your story because you took care of your dad till pretty recently, and you have been through so many caregiving experiences. And I love the title of your care of your presentation because it is a river to navigate. There's a
yeah,
lot of
definitely.
navigation, and as you know, your caregiving experience can be the most horrific experience in your life, or pretty close to beautiful, depending on how you handle it.
Absolutely.
So take it
Well,
away, my friend.
all
Introduce
right.
yourself.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. There
Yeah.
we go. And yeah, that Lori and Paige were amazing because Dad was in hospice, and as you said, it wasn't so long ago that he passed, and I was very teary through the whole presentation as well, and just what wonderful work that they are doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, so life is like a gently along, and sometimes the rapids come out of nowhere, and the river is a great metaphor for life, and it also resonates with the experience of caregiving. So I'm Theresa Wilbanks, as Linda said, and I cared for my dad for 7 years. He passed at 99 in December, and in fact, he would have been 100 last Friday. And I do come from a family of caregivers. At 17, I gave up my bedroom for my mom's mom, who moved in with us. And my parents took care of my dad's mom until she was 101. So, when care became too much, she was actually in their home until she was 101. And when care became too much for them, she went into a nursing home, but they still continued to visit her until she passed at 104. So, when I was caring for Dad, um, even though I had seen this caregiving in our family, I had no idea what I was in for. And I became so burned out, and I knew that I wasn't on a sustainable path. And I was really concerned about the effects of stress on my health. And I also worried that I would have significant regret about my relationship with Dad, which it seemed to be rapidly deteriorating. And I wanted to understand why this role was so challenging, and did that caregiver gene skip me? And as I delved into the whys, it became clear that it was just hard. And my folks kind of shielded that reality from me. And it wasn't until I read my dad's journal that I saw that it was hard for them as well, but that's a story for another day. So the need to understand why I was struggling, it led to a lot of trial and error and tears. And at the end, though, I came up with a series of strategies that helped me at least minimize the stress, and ultimately it improved my emotional and physical health. So the path that I was on to a more sustainable experience also led me to a more meaningful journey. So I looked back at the first few years of caregiving, and I thought, it didn't have to be so hard. And I just really wanted to help other family caregivers. So I became a certified caregiving consultant and educator, and I founded Sustainable Caregiving. And this is how I met Linda. So, I was actually her stalker in the beginning. I was given her book, Connecting Caregivers, by the home care agency owner.
You're too funny.
It was, yeah. So I highlighted all these sections, and I had dog-eared pages, and I was really following her work. And I finally met her and Lynn, Linda's co-host, at a holiday party get together. And I confessed that I had been stalking her. And, the beautiful thing is, though, is I found Linda as a caregiver who needed help. And I was also on a path to help caregivers. So she became an inspiration as someone who cares for caregivers, and she helped me tremendously. So this conference has been fantastic. I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to learn. I'm always, always learning. And, I just want to share with all of you some of the strategies that help me, create a more sustainable path for my experience. And as Becky said Tuesday, the caregiving experience isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And we don't know how long that we're going to be in a caregiving role. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges, why it is so challenging. And sustainability is about incorporating the strategies that help us care for ourselves, while we care for our family member for as long as needed. And these strategies, they allow me to flip the script from I have to be a caregiver to I get to be a caregiver. And in addition to improving my health, the strategies helped improve my relationship with Dad. It improved significantly. And this is a photo of my husband, Dad, and I celebrating Dad's 98th birthday. And so imagine your caregiving journey is like being in a raft on a river. And the river has calm sections, it has obstacles, rapids, and a few waterfalls. And at times we feel like we've been tossed out of the raft and are drowning. And storms pop up. The emotions swirl. I call the trifecta guilt, anger, and resentment. But there are so many emotions. The stress and overwhelm can be all consuming. And as we all know, too much stress has a negative impact on our ability to think. We don't make our best decisions. Too much stress affects our health, affects our well-being, and our relationships do suffer. So as caregivers, we often feel like we have little control over our situation. And we may be trying to paddle upstream against the current, and the resistance gets really tiring. But when we step into the flow and go with the current, we can navigate the obstacles with momentum and agility. And the key is that when we employ certain strategies to protect our well-being and manage the emotions and the stress, the river doesn't change, but how we navigate the river changes. We step into the flow. So we're going to look at some strategies that help us change our behaviors and our reactions. As caregivers, it's so easy to have those reactions because we're often just really stressed. But changing the behaviors and our reactions will help change our response to those worrisome thoughts and the stressful events. So our caregiving experience will likely intensify as time goes on, and the strategies that work today, they may not work tomorrow. And likewise, the strategies that aren't a good fit today may be a big help next month. So you can set aside rather than discard the strategies that don't, fit your current situation, because as you know, the caregiver river keeps changing. Circumstances change and our situation changes. So these strategies fit together like a unique puzzle, unique for you and your experience, and the strategies support each other. And at first, it may seem like you're building a Jenga tower that continues to tumble. But when you get the strategies dialed in, you have a stable tower, a sustainable caregiving foundation, or back to our caregiver river, you might consider it as your well-stocked life raft. Now, there are 12 strategies, and we're only discussing 4 of them today, but we'll touch on the others. And the 12 strategies are divided into 4 categories. Prevent or recover from burnout, which is what we'll be talking about today, is the first category. Reimagine control, and these strategies here include accepting the role, accepting help, accepting alternatives, kind of putting down that battle armor, and accepting the destination. And the third category is managing the emotions. And these strategies are some that we've heard about in the last few days and today, in fact: journaling, venting, forgiving, and planning. And then transforming obstacles is about reframing. So let's talk about burnout. We've heard a lot about burnout also in the last few days, and burnout is caused by excessive and repeated stress. And when we're experiencing burnout, we're exhausted. We no longer feel like we have the ability to cope. We view responsibilities and interactions, as increasingly more stressful and frustrating. Things that we might have handled well in our past, we just can't seem to deal with as well now. And who can relate to some of these feelings? I view burnout as a spectrum. And as caregivers, we can be anywhere on the spectrum at any given time based on what we're going through. And it's a slippery slope, or I call it like a slippery scale, because we can end up, we usually at the more challenging end and not even realize that we were heading in that direction. So some of the strategies to prevent burnout, in the ones we'll be talking about today include placing boundaries, prioritizing self-care. We talked a lot about self-care. We'll talk a little bit more today. Protecting our capacity for compassion, and importantly, self-compassion, and practicing mindfulness to cultivate awareness. And these 4 strategies work together. They really support each other. Boundaries, they help us prioritize self-care. They protect our well-being. Mindfulness, helps us identify crossed boundaries. Mindfulness and compassion helps us reinforce our boundaries according to our values. So our first strategy to prevent burnout is to place boundaries, which involves a lot of communication, which is why you see the symbol there of 2 folks having a conversation over coffee. And just like in a river, boundaries are not fixed. They must widen and narrow and adapt to the circumstances or the flow. And the conversations around boundaries are rarely one and done. And why boundaries are important? Well, they're limits that protect our emotional and our physical well-being. And they offer us the opportunity to be more in control of our time and how we spend it. And without boundaries, the overwhelm of caregiving can feel like being in the middle of that storm of emotions, like we really have no control over what's going on around us. And we may feel like we're drowning. You can't get our breath and question how we are going to survive. And this is how I felt. So these are all things that, I couldn't understand why I was feeling this way and what was, causing all of these challenges. When the things that I was doing day to day didn't seem that difficult, but this feeling of drowning and just not being able to survive was very real. So setting boundaries is a way of respecting and protecting ourselves. And I like to say that when you choose when to give, you save enough of you so that you're able to give when you choose. Some barriers to setting boundaries. So barriers, sorry, let me go back. Here we go. Okay, who do we need to set boundaries with? We can set boundaries with our family member. We can set boundaries with those folks on our care team. We can set boundaries with, our siblings. So there are a lot of folks that, we are interacting with very differently now. Maybe as our roles and relationships have changed, that we recognize that, we need to change some of the ways that we interact with them. So as caregiving tasks increase, you can reevaluate all of these roles and relationships and responsibilities and your limits so that you're not giving so much of yourself that your well-being suffers. And, it's, how much is too much? How much time, how much headspace, how much energy is too much to devote that goes, into taking care of a family member. This is why it's so hard, because we feel like putting limits around something like that is just wrong. It feels wrong. We should just, be able to give of ourselves. But when we're giving too much, then we really are not able to support our family member at the level that we need to. So this is for you to decide. And the answers may change frequently, just based on the circumstances. And defining a limit around care responsibilities is really one of the most important boundaries we can set. It requires that we have to accept that we can't do it all, not without consequences. And this is where accepting help comes in. And when we accept help, we gain time for ourselves so that we can focus on our well-being. And then we're in a better place, to give to our family member and support them. So the barriers to boundaries. A common barrier is that we haven't been, taught how to set boundaries, and therefore we may not recognize the need. And we may realize that a boundary is necessary, but we feel guilty about setting that boundary. Or we set a boundary and it's rejected or resisted. So I experienced all 3 of these, and it was several years into the caregiving experience, before I realized why I was struggling. I had set boundaries but in my work setting and other areas of my life without any challenges. But, this was different. This was personal. And this was my dad and the people who were helping me care for my dad. And so, they became like family, and boundaries. It was just all very, just a very different situation. They weren't on my radar. And then when they were, and I realized that they were needed, oh, the guilt, and just summon the courage and set the boundaries, I was able to do that. And then they were trampled. So there are a lot of barriers to why, we're challenged to set boundaries. I can give you just a quick example. We had a neighbor, we had home care agencies, and they were fantastic. But at this particular time, we had a neighbor helping us out with dad. My husband, Joe, and I were able to live, 20 minutes away. We were able to get away for a few weeks at a time. And Nellie was able to come over and help dad. And she just, loved to come over. She'd come over twice a day, and then we paid her. And, dad, I wasn't able to communicate with him necessarily. I'd call and the phone was off the hook and he wasn't, doing email. But Nellie, I could, check in with her. I could, call and talk to dad, but check in with Nellie and really see how he was doing. So Nellie would just pop in twice a day. I told her, don't ring the bell. Dad's in the back painting or watching TV. There's no need for him to come answer the door. Just come on in. And that was fantastic and worked really well for about a year. Well, then as things changed and I was over at dad's almost all day, every day. When I wasn't there, I was worried about him. Joe and I decided we needed to be closer. We actually moved back in. Nellie would still pop in twice a day and, not ring the bell, come in. And Joe and I both worked remotely. So we're, engrossed on our work, and she'd come in. And so our situation changed, and I needed to have that conversation with Nellie. And we were going to continue the pay, but I asked her to come over just, once a day in the afternoon. Dad was pretty overwhelmed with all the visits, so he was okay with that. He also asked me to ask her to stop bringing food. So I worked out this conversation, sat down with Nellie, told her how much we appreciated her. And we just wanted her to come over once a day and kind of between 3 and 4. And she at first was taken aback, then accepted it. That's great. And it worked wonderfully for 2 days. And so then she was back to popping in at random times. So it took another conversation, setting some consequences and making sure she still understood how much we appreciated her. And this was really challenging because this is someone who, we cared about. She was a friend, a neighbor, someone who was helping us care for dad. And yet setting this boundary and her receiving it, accepting it, and, following it was not working. And the responsibility was mine to, it wasn't hers, it was mine to reinforce, mine to make sure, that she understood what we needed. And, eventually we had to change our situation, but this was kind of my first understanding of why boundaries are so hard in this setting. And it's important to remember that, while we're setting boundaries, it can feel selfish, and it did. The opposite is true. Well-maintained boundaries are a gift to you and those in your caregiving circle and to your family member. And if I hadn't set limits around, the conversations or limits around Nellie's visits and had these conversations, the frustrations would have gotten to the point where resentment would have built and destroyed our relationship altogether. So boundaries really do preserve and protect relationships. So communication is key to setting and reinforcing boundaries. And some conversation tips include to be clear on your intention, because if you're clear in your intention, you can be clear in your communication. And it takes practice, respectfully and with as few words as possible. You want to communicate your boundary and word the request in terms of what you need and why you need it, rather than using the word you. And, I think Dr. Kate said it beautifully yesterday. I don't have the bandwidth for that right now. That was a great way to express it. Maybe you say, I need some space, rather than you need to stop. And share the consequences if the boundary is crossed. It can seem harsh, but that's really an important part of boundary setting, is what the consequences are, and to be firm and unapologetic. As I said, we set our boundaries for us. And that means if they're not working, it's our responsibility to reinforce or adjust them as needed. And like we said, they may need to be a little more rigid or a little more flexible based on the circumstances. We might set a boundary around when we communicate with our sibling about our parents' care. And then they call us at 11 p.m. at night with a suggestion, a great idea. And, they may have crossed a boundary around appropriate times to discuss, care details. And you can gently reinforce it by reminding them of a scheduled time to talk and that you need your sleep in order to be at your best. And a late night conversation interferes with a good night's sleep. So, it comes with practice to determine when boundaries are too rigid and too flexible or just right. But think of that river. And as things change, our boundaries may need to be wider, more narrow, more firm, or more flexible. So I have a link I can put in the chat for the PDF book that covers the 12 strategies. And within each strategy, there's a section with tips on how to start using the strategy, opportunities to reflect, to journal, like journal prompts, and steps to get started. So I'll put a link. So anything that I'm sharing, it'll be covered in that PDF ebook. I can put a link in the chat, or I can send it to Linda, whichever she prefers. So to get started working with boundaries, you might explore some questions like, how has the relationship changed between you and your care recipient, and how boundaries have changed or not, to reflect the new relationship. You might think about the last time you felt anger. Anger is often something that's just a sign that a boundary's been crossed. So you can think, the last time I felt anger, it was about this, was a boundary crossed, and what boundary might have been crossed? Or, what's not working? And would a boundary fix, this situation that's not working? Okay, I'll put a link in the chat. And then for your journal, because you're keeping at least one journal, right? I mean, there's so many important reasons to keep a journal. A few journal prompts include list the people. Think about who are the folks who are on your care team, who you interact with on a regular basis, and what opportunity might exist to establish, maybe adjust or reinforce a boundary. Maybe you've already set a boundary, but it's not working. And you could kind of journal what would make a difference. You could also start to describe the conversation that would allow you to set or reinforce the boundary with compassion. I had set boundaries without realizing it in a work situation frequently. I never had to really write out what I was going to say or how the conversation would go. It came fairly naturally. But with Nellie, I really felt the need to make sure that, I was, and protecting her feelings, because this was such an intimate, personal situation. She's coming over to help somebody she cares for. She's helping us care for Dad. It's very different than setting boundaries at work. So it does help to kind of jot out how the conversation will go and think through it so that you're, that you are communicating that boundary with compassion. And the image here of a sailboat, it just reminds me of the quote, you cannot adjust the wind, but you can adjust your sails. And I feel like when we find ourselves in the role of caregiver, whether we arrived here suddenly or gradually, we definitely need to adjust our sails. And some way to apply this new information about boundaries is to be, as we said, mindful of feelings of anger, because it can be a clue that boundaries have been crossed. And then after journaling the steps, begin the conversation. And it may take more than one. In fact, it will probably take more than one. And I see somebody mentioned in the chat, yes, Linda has great journaling workshops. So join Linda's journaling workshops and get started. And journals are so important. They're important. We can document our family members, medical information, things that happen, just so that we don't have to rely on memory, which, as we know, is challenging at the best of times, but during caregiving is really challenging. And then just to document our emotions and our feelings and the challenges, or just anecdotes of what happened. They're certainly funny things that happen during our caregiving day, but to keep a record and a journal is so important. And it can help you also look back and see that, yeah, this was hard. These emotions that I felt, these just challenging feelings were very justified. This was a difficult experience, and yet look at all that I accomplished. So I can't recommend the journal enough, and Linda's journaling workshop is a perfect way to get started if you haven't already, or join her. And I know she has some wonderful inspirational tips. So that's boundaries. And next, we're going to talk about self-care and prioritizing self-care. So before we can prioritize self-care, though, we have to redefine and reimagine it. You may not have recognized your hobbies and interests prior to caregiving as self-care. Going to the gym, reading for pleasure, spending time with friends. I mean, this was just a part of life. And as we begin to care for a family member and our priorities shift, it's not uncommon to give up our interests and our hobbies bit by bit until our life revolves around caregiving. We often don't even see it coming. And the image here is a comfy corner where you can just create this space where you can go to re-energize, because the caregiving journey, this expedition that you are on, it requires stamina, and you can replenish your power with your passions reimagined. Why it's important. There's a strong connection between our physical well-being and our emotional well-being. And, in order to prevent burnout, it's crucial to participate in the self-care activities that protect and preserve the mind, the body, and the mind-body connection. So self-care helps us stay stronger emotionally and physically, so we maintain our energy reserves and perform, optimally while we're caring for our family member. And when we're stronger, the repeated stresses of caregiving, they just have less of a negative impact. And and we've said it before, but, when it's possible, it's better to share the caregiving responsibilities by delegating or accepting help, so you can continue to participate in your passions. You can think of it as lightening the caregiving load. But accepting help helps you spend more time on self-care. So as the experience intensifies, self-care opportunities may come in minutes rather than hours. And, we can make the most of those minutes by redefining self-care as often as necessary to fit within our day and fit within our routines. I remember I resisted routines in the beginning. I resisted them because they made me feel like less spontaneous, like I was giving up my freedom to this role of caregiver. And, I couldn't do what I wanted, when I wanted. And what I didn't realize at the time was that routines set up around the day would really actually give me more time at the end of the day for what I wanted to do, what I needed to do, for me. It enabled me to
every single caregiver says to me, once they started a routine, things got better.
Yes, that's absolutely true. You can start, you think of it as now all of a sudden you're so focused on your family member, but really you're prioritizing what's important, which includes self-care for you. And it made a big difference. So I was very resistant. I was paddling upstream and I didn't want to put a routine in place. But when I did, things changed for me as well, Linda. So, you think about what activities renew your energy and calm your nerves. When you're thinking about self-care, what are your passions? Maybe you'd love to travel, and maybe you're no longer able to travel because of your caregiving responsibilities. Well, would learning a new language or maybe a new cuisine fuel your travel passion? Because that's about like reimagining your passions, trying to figure out how you can kind of keep some of those things into your day-to-day life as a caregiver. And not just, continue them, but in 5 to 10, maybe 15-minute blocks, because you don't have that hour that you had in the past to go to a yoga class. You might go to your comfy corner and enjoy a cup of tea. I have here my cup of happy, and inside it says, do more of what makes you happy. So maybe it's just, having a cup of tea, might be reading poetry to calm your nerves, or maybe a walk outside is what you need to re-energize. So whatever you do, it's important to understand why you're doing it so that you get the most out of the activity. Like if you go for a walk and you want to get your mind off the worries, you might try a walking meditation. or tune into the things around you that you see, just so you're focused on maybe nature, or you listen to a podcast, or call a friend. It's okay to call a friend and have a conversation about the challenges, as long as you feel better after the venting session, and that has a lot to do with who you call. So it's not that you're necessarily escaping the challenges, it's just finding ways that are making you feel better. I can remember going on runs to relieve stress, and coming back from the run, I was more stressed than when I left, because circular arguments were just going over and over in my head about dad driving. And so I'd come back and I was just ready for another argument, and it wasn't working. Running exercise was not working for me. And it's an example of a self-care strategy not working, in fact, backfiring. But, when I combined this strategy with other strategies, then it became effective. I added mindfulness and boundaries around my emotional investment, and then my runs began to relieve stress. So it's just a matter of figuring out what works for you and how to dial it in, for your situation. So once we've reimagined what self-care looks like, we're ready to prioritize and protect self-care activities with routines and boundaries. And before we go on, we've been talking about restorative self-care activities. They restore our energy and they restore our sense of calm. But it's really important to mention that basic self-care, such as wellness visits, nutrition and hydration, and therapy or counseling, are some of the most important self-care activities to prioritize. And once we get those needs met and we're going to our wellness visits, we can move from survive to thrive. And that was the name of Dr. Kate's presentation. So, here are a few examples of ways to microdose self-care. We talked about creating an oasis. So that's a corner where you can, either it's, within your care recipient's home or in your own home, and create a place to restore and regroup. And you can imagine LED candles and maybe special scents, mood music, tea, pillows in your favorite color. And just imagine it, surrounding yourself with all the things that make you happy, so you have this place to go to. And another way to microdose self-care is with music. You might create a Reset My Mood playlist, meditation. If you're hesitant to get started, we've heard about some good apps, but there, some that I've tried and enjoy are Calm, Shine, Chopra, and Headspace. I've tried quite a few, and Chopra is my favorite at the moment, but they all have been absolutely fantastic. And they give you a quick way to just do a 5, 10, or 15-minute meditation. Breathing exercise, we've talked about that, and there's an app for that too. Exercise, move, run, walk, bike, dance, skate your way to contentment. So whatever makes you happy and gets you moving, that's really helpful, just to release stress. And then tea, find your favorite flavor. There are a couple I love. Pukka's Revitalize. It has cardamom and ginger and cinnamon, and that one's just wonderful. Another more calming tea, it's their love tea, chamomile, rose, and lavender. So just find teas that you look forward to, and you can sit down and just have that relaxing moment. It can just change kind of the course of your day. Writing. We talked about journaling, and maybe it's a diary form or poetry or a gratitude journal. So if you enjoy writing, you just find a beautiful blank book and just hold your unique thoughts in there. And then nature. It's not always possible to get outside. I would often sit at the window, and I call it turning on the bird channel or the squirrel channel, and just watch the animals outside, when I was at Dad's. And that always made a big difference. Mm-hmm. Pet therapy. If you are lucky enough, fortunate enough to have a furry, cuddly friend, just spending time with your pet can provide that self-care. And the funny thing is you may have done that before caregiving and not recognize it as self-care, but now it's important when you're doing that just to take in all that love and really feel it, so that you are getting all that benefit of the self-care experience. And those are just a few examples of, self-care activities that may fit into your day. And as you begin to redefine and reimagine self-care, again, you can ask yourself, what are your passions? how you can modify them and work them into your daily activities. Or, what do you consider guilty pleasures? What if you remove the guilt? One thing that I like to do is watch competitive cooking shows. And I couldn't because there was just so much to do. And if I was watching the show and thinking about all the things I wasn't doing, it was just stressful. So I started watching the shows while I was preparing meals. There was no guilt and no resentment. I still had my show when I was accomplishing something. And I think, because that's how I viewed that, I could have been mindfully cooking, and that would have also been self-care if I had immersed myself in that experience. But this is how I chose to use my time. And it was self-care. And it's funny to think about just watching a TV show as self-care, but for me it was. And so what you've got to figure out what works for you, and take some thought and reflection, and then start to work them into your day. And for your journal prompt, you might think about what you missed since becoming a caregiver. As caregivers, we experience so many losses, and you might miss travel, you might miss time with friends or leisurely weekends. So make a list, and then how can you create, experiences within your day that help you feel fulfilled and connected to the hobbies that you put on hold. And to take those steps to begin to prioritize self-care, start to choose one or two of those activities and layer them in as you start to redefine and reclaim self-care. Just layer them into your day. And when you find what works for you, you can put your favorites into a routine, and then put boundaries around the time and the activity so that you're able to do them every day or so many times a week that you're just really feeling that benefit. Okay, next, we're going to talk about self-compassion. And I see someone said, Lord, I miss my vacations with my husband. I know that is one of the most challenging, can be one of the most challenging aspects of caregiving, is that opportunity to travel. So protect compassion. The next strategy is focused on compassion and importantly, self-compassion. I like the way Dr. Tam Cummings, who opened the conference, described self-compassion. She said, we practice acts of kindness for ourselves. Cheryl Strayed, the author of the memoir Wild, she said, compassion is about giving all the love you've got. Well, feeling and showing compassion is about sharing love. But what if you're feeling low on love, due to the wild ride that is caregiving? Those uncomfortable emotions can certainly feel like an anchor. How we embrace the wildness of the river of the experience is really challenging, because it requires that we release the emotions that prevent us from flowing in harmony with the current and with love. So figuring out how we can do that is a real challenge. And why focusing on compassion is important is because feeling and showing compassion to ourselves and others it just becomes more and more challenging as we give more and more of ourselves to caregiving tasks and responsibilities. Our capacity for compassion gets depleted, and I call this our compassion reserves. It's crucial to protect our capacity to feel and show compassion, because without it, we're no longer behaving or acting in accordance with our values. Have you ever looked in the mirror and just not recognized yourself? Like, who am I? Because I've done that. Can anyone relate to that experience? When our compassion reserves are depleted, we're so much more easily overwhelmed, and we can become quickly irritated, because as consistent stress from caregiving causes burnout, the result is more stress. This is not fair, because our coping mechanisms are no longer effective, and our energy just continues to get depleted, and we have trouble sleeping, which just adds to the negative cycle. And empathy drains us even further. It's said that by a lot of folks that it's not compassion fatigue that we're experiencing, it's empathy fatigue, because it's the empathy that drains us and takes our energy. It's, getting in there with the person and feeling what they're feeling that is really a challenge. So as we're drained, we no longer feel compassion for our care recipient, our friends, our family, our strangers, ourselves. Love feels elusive. or strangers. I can remember being in line at the grocery store and being irritated by the friendly banter between the customer in front of me and the cashier. And I thought, I used to be that customer. She's obviously not a caregiver with her lighthearted attitude, but she may have been a caregiver. She just wasn't a burned out caregiver if she was. And then those happy, friendly interactions throughout the day are so important. But all I could feel was irritation. And it wasn't even that I was in a hurry. I think it was just that somebody else is happy and I couldn't relate to that at the moment. So similarly, we may hear about caregivers who feel tremendous gratitude for the opportunity to care for a family member. And it can feel like another failure. It can feel like a failure on our part when we don't feel that gratitude. I can remember reading responses to posts in the caregiver forums from caregivers who were thankful for their experience. And all I could think was, they are walking on a different path, on a completely different planet. I had to stop reading forum posts because rather than get solutions and feel hope, they made me feel more alone. When we're experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue, empathy fatigue, gratitude is often not within the realm of possible emotions. So how do we find our way back to ourselves, our recognizable selves? Returning to our compassionate selves requires identifying the path that led us to our current state, following it back, and then changing direction. So we may redefine and increase self-care activities. We might adjust boundaries or routines so that self-care is a priority and it's protected. We may decide to add more help or try a different type of help. We might reevaluate venting opportunities. Think about how you currently vent your frustrations, and do you feel better afterward? So if the answer is yes, then venting is working to relieve stress. But if the answer is no, and you find that you're still venting about the same things over and over, it may not be helping. So in fact, it may be keeping you stuck on the problem, or it may be who you're venting to. So maybe you need to find a new person, a new counselor or support group or a different friend, someone who gets it. So venting can work for us and it can also work against us. And it's working for us. It helps us get back to that compassionate person that we once were. So once we get the formula dialed in and our compassion is replenished, it can be like putting on a new pair of glasses with a new prescription. But instead of seeing things clearly again, we feel things clearly again. That's what it was like for me. So we could say that healthy boundaries are inspired by compassion for ourselves, compassion for our family member, and compassion for those who help us care for our family member. Compassion helps us reinforce our boundaries in a way that maintains relationships and helps us maintain an overall sense of well-being. Boundaries help us protect our compassion reserves by establishing limits that protect the buildup of resentment and anger. And mindfulness, which is the next strategy, helps us maintain and protect our boundaries. So in that moment, when the emotions are swirling, so this is in that moment, maybe the trifecta, you're feeling the anger, guilt, resentment, fear. Imagine giving yourself a big hug. You deserve it, because this is really hard. And asking yourself the question, what do I need in this moment? And you might put your hand over your heart, and ask yourself that question. This technique was shared earlier as well in the conference. What do I need in this moment? And take a few deep breaths and just wait and listen for the answer. You might ask yourself, what do we need in this moment? And the questions and the answers lead us to compassion. And if we can be compassionate with ourselves while we're feeling all of these powerful emotions, then the barriers to compassion begin to disappear. It helps us to accept our situation, our challenges, and our shortcomings. So it helps us see the path more clearly, the more compassionate way forward. So a few journal prompts. One of my favorite quotes is never give from the depths of your well, but from your overflow. So in your journal, you might describe what it feels like to be low on love, to be giving from the depths of your well. You could journal ways that you can begin to replenish your well. And then as you begin to find your way back to your loving self and showing yourself kindness and compassion, you can ask yourself each day, as often as necessary, what do I need to replenish my feelings of well-being? Something else that might work for you is to develop a mantra. Another quote is from Jack Kornfield: if your compassion doesn't include yourself, it's incomplete. Maybe you create a mantra around that quote. It might be, I am here for you, meaning you're there for yourself. This is hard. I'm doing my best. Or I deserve kindness. Or I am enough. Whatever mantra speaks to you, and just place it around your home where you'll see it throughout the day. But mantras are a great way to just keep in mind what's important.
I think it's very important too to watch your words that you use for yourself. Years ago, I was having a tough time. I used to say I'm hanging in there. And then I thought, who the heck wants to be hanging in there? So I always say I'm joyful and grateful. And sometimes people look at me with a crooked eye and I say, some days I'm joyfully challenged, but I'm always grateful.
No, you're so right. And that's why the mantra and how we speak to ourselves should be as positive as possible. It's easy to, tell ourselves what we've done wrong or what we don't want. And it's important to, yes, just continually remind ourselves of what we do want and ask ourselves what we do need. Excellent point, Linda. So the fourth strategy that we'll talk about is practicing mindfulness. And I know mindfulness is discussed so much lately, and it's so important, though, for us to flow from the present moment. The image of someone meditating in a beautiful setting is classic. The reality is that mindfulness can look quite different when we're caring for a family member. It needs to look different because we might not have this beautiful body of water to sit next to. And flowing from the present moment can be practiced anywhere. And tapping into the power of the present and what is vitally important, it reduces our stress and it helps us maximize our memories and minimize regret, which is so important on our journey. So mindfulness is important. As Eckhart Tolle says, stress is caused by being here, but wanting to be there, or being in the present, but wanting to be in the future. It's a split that tears you apart inside. And this is pretty well how I lived for my first couple of years of caregiving, not wanting to be where I was. And when I learned to focus on the present moment and learn to accept and then focus on the present moment, then a lot of the stress associated with ruminating on the past or worrying about the future was minimized, if not eliminated. So this is why it is so important for us as caregivers to really understand mindfulness from more than just a meditating standpoint, but just cultivating that awareness. So practicing mindfulness helps us cultivate awareness. It helps us manage stress. And when we're mindful, we're observing our thoughts and emotions without letting ourselves get immersed in them. So our responses become less impulsive and less reactive. Mindfulness helps create the space between the thought and the reaction. When I first read this years ago, I thought that sounds nice, but it actually started to happen for me, and it made all the difference. So when we're non-judgmental in our awareness, we can accept the experience with curiosity and openness. It's a much different place than reacting. And we can't be curious and angry at the same time. And, an example is what we've said. Mindfulness helps us identify when a boundary's been crossed. We might feel anger, and then with curiosity realize that, we need to reinforce a boundary, or we need to set or modify a boundary. Or maybe we ask a question instead of reacting in the way that first, came to mind. So additional benefits include improving self-reflection and self-observation. And this helps develop coping skills. As mindfulness helps us, take a step back and kind of see what's going on, then we come up with different strategies and ways to move forward. Mm-hmm. And awareness also helps us recognize when we feel stress in our body so that we can calm that mind-body feedback loop that fuels our stressful thoughts. So if you think about where you feel stress in your body, like is it in your shoulders or in your neck? And which comes first? Is it the thought or the tension in your body? And it almost doesn't matter, because the more tense you feel, the more negative thoughts surface. And then the more negative thoughts surface, the more tense you feel. And it just becomes this feedback loop that's not helpful. So awareness helps break that negative cycle. And it gives you the opportunity to examine the thoughts and breathe through the tension and just really see what's going on. And awareness helps us recognize when winning is losing. So we might be, fighting a battle that's counterproductive to our overall objectives. I remember I would have died on Blueberry Hill. Like, I called it the Blueberry Battle. And these repeated skirmishes over this resealable bag of blueberries threatened the overall objective of creating like a peaceful environment for Dad and for us. And there seemed like simple solutions, but we never actually, it was funny. I mean, it's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. And awareness really helped me recognize that although I might win the blueberry battle, the ultimate objective would be lost. So awareness does help us recognize when winning is losing and when we can put down that battle armor.
Yes.
So cultivating mindfulness does take practice. That's why it's called practice. And it's always going to be practice. And it takes consistency. And we can practice mindfulness certainly in meditation, which might be a walking meditation or a sound bath meditation. That happens to be my favorite because you can lie down and it's okay to fall asleep. Yoga is a mindfulness practice. Tai Chi, mentioned by Dr. Bernstein, has been called meditation in motion. And we can practice by doing breathing exercises. So those are all ways that we can practice and develop awareness, practice mindfulness, develop awareness. But we can also use lots of daily activities, and we can weave mindfulness practice into everyday life. And a key to this is practicing during the less stressful activities will help you develop the ability to remain present through the more challenging activities. So if you're practicing when you're not at a high stress level frequently throughout the day, then when you reach that moment of stress, you're going to be in a better position to manage that situation. So it's really important to practice when you're not stressed. And a few ways to incorporate mindfulness into your day to reduce anxiety and stress, but also to train your mind to be more present. Think about, just being in line at the checkout counter, and you might just take a deep breath and hold it for 5 seconds and release your breath slowly, and do this a few times, just to release the tension from your body that you probably didn't even realize you were holding. And there are a lot of breathing exercises, and you can find the ones that work for you and just do them throughout the day. Maybe at a traffic light, if you keep a stone or a small rock within reach, and at a red light, just hold it and run your fingers over it, or just notice the feel of the steering wheel, the texture, the temperature. Is the seat firm or soft? These are things that just bring your attention back to the physical. They help you become present in the moment. You might just look out the window, and what do you see? And look at each object as if you were seeing it for the first time. You could notice just the shapes or the colors or the movement, and then practice increasing awareness, like without fixing on any one object. You might, on your walk, just perceive with all of your senses. So how many things can you see, smell, hear, feel, or taste? And that just keeps you focused on your surroundings and on the present moment. And these things sound so small, and they are simple things to do. And the more that you do them throughout the day, the more that you start to see that your awareness has changed. You're able to take that pause between what happens and your reaction. So as you get started incorporating more of these into your days, just keep in mind and reflect on the fact that the mindfulness, compassion, boundary, connection, it helps us use mindfulness to act in accordance with our, in accordance with our hearts, and use compassion to set boundaries in accordance with our values. They all just work together to support us and our well-being. And to better understand the connection, I'd like you to take a moment to imagine that you're sitting on a fluffy cloud of calm and clarity. Can you see your cloud? Calm in your cloud, and your compassion reserves are in a blue heart-shaped pillow. Linda, you probably recognize this pillow.
Yes.
So your compassion reserves are in a blue heart-shaped pillow, and you're hugging the pillow, and the pillow gives you comfort, and you're protecting your compassion. And the cloud boundaries around you shift. You can't see them, but they're there, and they're protecting you and your compassion reserves. And outside the cloud is the chaos of life, but the area within the circle around you remains calm because the boundaries are working to protect you and your compassion reserves. And when someone starts to cross your boundary or step on your cloud, you say, "Hey, you, get off of my cloud." but you say it with compassion. So your journal prompt, hopefully that helped give everybody an image. I have a little video for you to see, a short one here in a minute, that'll also clear that up. But, jot down the mindfulness practices that appeal to you. You might also explore how mindfulness and boundaries can work together to create, a less stressful caregiving experience. That's what we all want, right? And then a few times a day, you might take a moment to use each of the 5 senses. As Fritz Perls says, lose your mind and come to your senses. Just refocus your attention on your surroundings. And it's particularly powerful when you combine it with time in nature. So let's take a quick look at how these strategies fit together. So we've talked about just 4 of the strategies today, but there are more. And when you figure out how your strategies fit together for you and your situation, then you begin to develop a stable, it's fluid yet solid yet fluid ecosystem, because the river is ever changing and your support system must evolve to match the current and the obstacles. So just for another quick video of how that works together, and then we'll stop for a few questions. Oh, so thank you all, and thank you, Linda.
Thank you. I was dancing to that music there for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So mostly a lot of people in the chat said what a great speaker you are, and how glad they are to hear from you, and you gave them a different perspective to look at. But one person said, how do we figure out who we are after a loved one dies?
Yeah. And that's a good question. And that's, I've been going through this last year of grief, and it's a big
Me too.
challenge. Yeah, that's right. And when your whole everything you were was caught up in caring for that family member and they're gone, so you're not only dealing with your grief and loss of your family member, yeah, who are you now? There's a lot of grief and loss, and a lot of people think, oh, well, now you can be free and go do all the things you couldn't do. Well, that's not how it works. We have to
No.
figure out who we are again and what's important to us, and reconnect to our passions, and still grieve. It's important, to grieve for
Yeah.
as long as it takes. And
Yeah.
that may be, forever. And that's fine.
Well,
So
I always say if you love hard, you hurt hard. And I
yes,
wouldn't have it any other way.
yes, that's so true.
So,
And I think reconnecting to our passions, thinking about what it was that you love to do, um, and before you were in that caregiving role, and then try to reconnect in small steps, just like with self-care here, 5, 10, 15. Just start small and baby steps and get back to those things that you're passionate about.
well, for anyone that's listening, so, since I do caregiver support groups, people are my support group for years and then their loved one passes. And we still have a relationship. So we've been having a Zoom like once a month because we all know each other already. And just talking about our feelings. And I want to start developing some more kind of stuff with that, like after the first of the year, because I think it's so important. It's like caregiving's over and it's crash. What the heck?
Yeah, all those folks you were interacting with who gave you support, they're no longer in your life and they've moved on and you're
Yeah.
still there. Like, it's just like becoming a caregiver. Where did everybody go?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
it's so
It seems
important that
like
you're doing
almost like
that.
a
That's
second
awesome.
loss. So
Yeah.
So I'll be addressing that stuff in the future, but thank you so much for being here today. We so appreciate you. You send me the links and put the links
I'll
everywhere
put
and
the
we'll
link
get
in the
everybody
chat.
good stuff.
Will
Thanks,
do. All right.
Theresa. Have a
Thank you,
delicious
everyone.
day.
Thank you. You too.
Oh my goodness, that was so fabulous.